Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the way we communicate with one another. We need to think about how important it is to properly communicate and to be respectful. It's election season again in the US, and the pitch is high and the intensity will only crescendo as we approach November 5th, the presidential elections. The 2024 elections will be the 60th quadrennial presidential election in the US. It's hard to imagine that 4 years have passed since the last presidential election. Once an election ends, the next begins almost immediately. But as the date approaches, the pitch heightens. It becomes shrill. With each passing presidential election, I have witnessed a transformation in style, method, and content of the dialogue between people. This is true not just of the candidates and their proxies, but also of the average voter on both sides of the aisle. People have moved into their proverbial corners, and as opposed to coming to discuss differences of policies, they shout at one another and transform their opponents into Neanderthals and Darth Vaders. The other is either evil incarnate or simply too stupid to understand. I watch and listen to the arguments and I'm stupefied. The problem with these arguments is that they are no longer conversations or debates. People are frozen into their perspectives and convinced that they are correct. They so firmly think that the opposite is not just wrong, but the opposite side is blatantly evil and destructive. They think the opposite side are Nazis and Hitlers. The other side is destroying democracy, destroying America, destroying personal rights. Think about the arguments on both sides of these topics: gun control, abortion, immigration, freedom of speech. Just think about them and you'll see on both sides the language is very similar. The discussions become battles. The word argument derives from the Latin agere, which means to make bright or to enlighten, to make known or to prove. Today, to argue is to fight with words. Seldom do people win arguments. More often than not, people just end the argument upset and frustrated. Conversation, on the other hand, is a dialogue. Conversation is banter, discourse, even debate. It is civilized and it is fun. Lively conversation is edifying. It's a lost art. The words converse and conversation derive from the Latin con, which means with, and verse is a line, but not a line of poetry. That's what you think as a line in poetry. The verse in Latin really means the line dug with a plow. The essential point of the word is that the two or more people are talking together, and even if they disagree with one another, they are in line with one another. Today in politics, agreeing to disagree is absent. The parties and the people do not respect one another, and as a result, the discussions have devolved. But what neither side recognizes is that there is an entire group of people that are not on the polls. They're not out there on the extremes. There's a significant minority of voters who are moderate and in the middle. These undecided voters are the ones who will sway this election in November. These voters are not convinced by invective, cliches, drama, or populism. They are not and will not be convinced by depicting the other side as extremely evil. The reason they are undecided is that they are, by definition, uncommitted. Therefore, the best strategy to entice them is using moderate arguments, not extremes. And a moderate, the undecided voter, may also possibly choose to avoid the entire election totally, because they're turned off by such extremes. A strategy of shouting at the moderates that if they don't vote, then evil will win is a poor strategy. Shouting that the only way to defeat evil is to vote for good will just further distance the swing voter. This tautology will not bring votes to either side. This argument will only antagonize the moderate would-be voter. The candidates are not going to change their style. The candidates firmly believe that their style is successful. The candidates believe that their style has gotten them this far. Trump will not become nice. Harris will not stop laughing and chuckling. But the campaigns are run by sophisticated people who have strategy, and they craft messages, not just about the candidates, but about platforms and objectives and vision. The campaign leaders know that they must win. This is what I do not understand, and I really, truly do not understand, that they do not seem to understand this. It's clear that the United States is split right down the middle in terms of voting. That was the case in the last election, and will certainly be the case in November as well. The only path to victory is to attract the swing voter who in the last election voted Democrat and in the one before voted Republican. For some reason, the campaigns have missed this fundamental point, and they are preaching only to the converted. This election will come and go. What worries me most is that the art of conversation will soon become extinct, replaced by unhelpful argumentation. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is an editorial by the Wall Street Journal published on August 12, 2024. It's entitled War Maneuvers in the Middle East. Subtitled, As Iran Prepares an Attack on Israel, Hamas Rejects Compromise. This editorial is sort of an overview of what's happening in the Middle East and a plea for Washington to provide Israel with the support and arms it needs to protect itself. This is how the editorial begins. The Pentagon is sending more naval and air assets to the Middle East, and Israel is on high alert as Iran positions its military for a potential attack on the Jewish state. Meanwhile, Hamas announced Sunday that it has no interest in the U.S.-brokered final round of negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire. The Pentagon said it is sending a missile submarine to the Mediterranean, while also urging the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier group to speed its way to the region. USS Theodore Roosevelt is already in the area. This is a formidable force, clearly intended to deter Iran from striking Israel, or at least minimize the damage in Israel if Tehran goes ahead. The U.S. also wants to limit the damage so it can persuade Israel not to strike back with force and keep diplomacy going. Now the editors explain that Hamas is responsible for the breakdown of the talks, not Israel, as is so often reported in the press. But diplomacy isn't going so well. After days of U.S. warnings that Israel had better cut a deal, Hamas pulled the rug out from under President Biden on the talks. Then on Monday, Hamas said its guards killed one hostage and seriously wounded two others it had taken on October 7th, without explanation. Hamas wants more war, not a ceasefire. This next section draws the tension between the U.S. and Israel regarding the ceasefire and the end game. The end game, what's going to happen in the end? The editorial continues. The White House sees a deal as its best way to buy peace through the U.S. election and perhaps deter a larger war. How strong such a deal would leave Hamas and the rest of the Iranian access for the future isn't a White House priority, but that is understandably Israel's main concern. The editorial now concludes in the following way. Israelis have a clearer idea of what works in this bad neighborhood. Give us the tools faster and we'll finish the job faster, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Congress in July, referring to Hamas. But how about speeding up munitions and transferring bunker-busting bombs as well? That ordinance, which can put Iran's nuclear facilities at risk, would get Tehran's attention as much as the other assets steaming to the region. Iran understands Western strength and resolve, and both are essential to any successful diplomacy. This is me talking, not the column. Yes, I think that Israel does have a better idea about how to handle this region, and the U.S. should help them, not hinder their efforts. Next up is a column, also from the Wall Street Journal. It was published on August 13th, 2024. The column was written by Anat Gueta and Elliot Penn. It is entitled, Now is the Time to Invest in Israeli Companies. Subtitled, The Country is Bursting with Innovation and Scored as one of the best for producing startups. This is the kind of column I love to read and present. It shows Israel in the best possible light, not just after October 7th. This is the type of column I have loved for years. The gist is, Israel's creative, dynamic, exciting place. In this case, it's a great investment. This is how the authors begin. Israel is tiny, surrounded by enemies, and engaged in a protracted multi-front war. Its conflict with the Palestinians seems inextricable. The United Nations and much of the media are immensely biased against the Jewish state, distorting public perception worldwide. Who would invest in Israeli companies today? We would. We have dedicated our careers to Israel investing, and our reasons start with business fundamentals. Israel consistently ranks as one of the most innovative countries in the world, dubbed the startup nation. Israel regularly scores among the highest globally for producing unicorns and in venture investments, 28 times the US per capita rate in 2021. It leads the world in research and development, spending as a percentage of gross domestic product. More than 400 multinational corporations have their offices in Israel. This tiny Middle Eastern country has more NASDAQ-listed companies than any other company besides China, Canada, and the US. Of course, the authors must deal with the current situation. They have to. After all, there's a war. And they ask, why would someone invest in a war zone? This is their answer. Israel's at war, and that brings unspeakable horrors. But investing in Israel fosters a strong, innovative economy, which leads to the recognition that the country is here to stay and has plenty to offer its neighbors. This was the conclusion of Egypt, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan when they made peace with the Jewish state. Israel is inching closer to a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia for the same reason. Investing in Israel today may seem counterintuitive, but it is resoundingly attractive. The case for Israel starts with high-quality companies at low valuations and extends to social and environmental progress, along with advancement of regional prosperity. Our ultimate goal is for Israel's success not only to benefit our investors, but to bring peace, freedom, and prosperity to all the residents of the Middle East. This is an excellent, excellent column. Just an excellent point of view, and so worthwhile. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 5 cartoons and 2 memes today. Sorry, no headlines today. I'm actually somewhat disappointed when we don't have headlines because I find them hilariously funny. Next week, I hope. These first 3 cartoons are brutal. They're biting. They're downright anti-Israel and anti-Jewish. This first cartoon is an abuse of the Holocaust. The entrance to Birkenau, Auschwitz-Birkenau, has 2 Israeli flags on it. The train tracks lead up to the death camp, which is the entrance to Gaza. This is just over-the-top Jew hatred. It is in its worst and most vile form. Next up is a winner's podium on the competition of innocent deaths. Third place, famine and diseases. Second, natural disasters. And first place, the IDF. The entire idea that Israel is killing more innocents than famine is just preposterous. Take, for example, the Great Chinese Famine of 1959-1961, when 30 million people died and 35 million births were lost. That's 65 million people caused by the famine. This next cartoon portrays Gaza burning and Bibi pouring gas on the flames as he runs to the ceasefire talks. He says, "We're ready," and the gas container reads, "Israel actions." This cartoon suggests that Israel is the reason for the breakdown of the ceasefire talks. Although Israel is making serious demands of Hamas, Hamas is making unreasonable demands of Israel and is getting a free pass. No one's criticizing them. We do not see much criticism of Hamas for the breakdown of the talks. That shows a significant part of the bias against Israel. This next cartoon shows an empty ceasefire talks roundtable, and a Gaza war is portrayed as an empty hand that will receive no help. This next cartoon is entitled Iranian Retaliation. A missile silo is on a calculator. In other words, Iran is calculating how and when they will strike Israel. That's interesting. Next up is a meme making fun of discriminating against Jews. In this case, no Jews allowed in country clubs, and as Democrats. This is a harsh critique, but there are certain elements of the Democratic Party that are hostile to traditional Jewish democratic values, like the love of Israel. And some Jews feel uncomfortable in the Democratic Party because of it. This next and last meme is a hilarious issue. It pokes fun at the Secret Service. Barney Fife, from the classic comedy TV show, The Andy Griffith Show, is saying, "So I hear that you are looking for a Secret Service director." Barney Fife, played by Don Knotts, was the imbecilic deputy sheriff of Maybury, who was simply unable to manage any situation. He would successfully foul up every normal situation. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. A former Saudi official has alleged that Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman forged his father, the king's signature on the royal decree that launched the kingdom's years-long stalemate war against Yemen's Houthi rebels. Saudi Arabia did not immediately respond to the request for a comment over the allegations made without supportive evidence by Saad al-Jabri in a BBC interview published. The kingdom has described him as a discredited former government official. Al-Jabri, a former intelligence official who lives in exile in Canada, has been in a long dispute with the kingdom as two of his children have been imprisoned in a case described as trying to lure him back to Saudi Arabia. The allegation comes as Prince Mohammed serves as Saudi Arabia's de facto leader, often leaders in place of his father, the 88-year-old King Salman. Al-Jabri told the BBC that a credible, reliable official linked to the Saudi Interior Ministry confirmed to him that the Prince Mohammed signed the decree declaring war in place of his father. Prince Mohammed was the defense minister at the time. Troops from the 7th Brigade expanded the operation in Gaza Strip to the Khan Yunis area and the outskirts of Deir al-Balach. The IDF spokesman announced this. The troops are eliminating terrorists, destroying combat compounds above and below ground. In one such compound, troops of the 603rd Battalion located dozens of rockets, launchers, and several anti-tank missiles. With intelligence guidance, troops of the 603rd Battalion and the Yahalom unit located and destroyed the underground tunnel, which was approximately 1.5 kilometers long, about a mile long, along the tunnel route. An active compound of Hamas terrorists was located where weapons, explosives, and equipment for long-term stay were found, which were used by the terrorists who left the compound as the troops arrived. Egypt agreed to the Israeli demand not to set a date for a full Israeli withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor along Gaza's border with Egypt. The Hezbollah-affiliated Al-Akbar newspaper reported this whole event. According to the report, Cairo agreed to a reduction of IDF troops and committed to preventing Hamas from building or rebuilding tunnels under the border. Hamas rejected the ongoing negotiations for hostage release and ceasefire in Gaza and accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of backtracking on terms already agreed, claiming this has prevented the completion of the deal. The new proposal accommodates Netanyahu's conditions and aligns with them, particularly his refusal to a permanent ceasefire, the complete withdrawal from Gaza Strip, his insistence on continuing to occupy Netzarim corridor, Rafah crossing, and the Philadelphia corridor. He has also introduced new conditions regarding the prisoner exchange deal and has retreated from other points preventing the conclusion of the exchange deal. The terrorist group said in a statement, and this is quoting again, "We hold Netanyahu fully responsible for the failure of the mediators' efforts, the obstruction of reaching an agreement, and full responsibility for the lives of his prisoners who are exposed to the same dangers as our people due to his continued aggression and systematic targeting of all aspects of life in the Gaza Strip." Hamas added that it remains committed to agreements made on July 2nd based on the outline presented by U.S. President Joe Biden and adopted by the UN Security Council. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu commented on ongoing negotiations and the hostage deal and the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, saying at the opening of the weekly cabinet meeting that we are engaged in negotiations, not concessions. It's an important principle. The principles we have established, he said, are essential for Israel's security. Netanyahu emphasized that, quote, Israel is prepared for any threat, both defensively and offensively. We are determined to defend ourselves and to exact a very heavy price from any enemy who dares to attack us from any front. He added, there are matters on which we can be flexible, but there are those on which we cannot, and we are steadfast on those, and we know well how to distinguish between the two. The Office of Palestinian Authority Chairman, Mahmoud Abbas, announced that Palestinian leadership has initiated international arrangements and coordination in preparation for Abbas and other leaders' visit to the Gaza Strip. According to the statement, the purpose of the visit is to stand with the people who are experiencing genocide and to reaffirm that the state of Palestine and the PLO are the legitimate authorities responsible for all of Palestine and are working to restore national unity. However, Palestinian Authority officials estimate that Abbas's visit to Gaza is unlikely to take place in the near future. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. This is a very unusual moment. It involves a violin in Gaza, played by a Chabad rabbi in Gaza. Unbelievable. The Chabad Shaliach, the emissary in Albania, Rabbi Yoel Kaplan, is an Israeli. He arrived in Israel at the outbreak of the war and has been serving in the reserves since the beginning of the campaign. Here he plays the sacred melody composed by the Baal Hatanya, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Ladi. He lived from 1745 to 1812. He was the founder of Chabad. He was the first Rebbe of Chabad. This melody is called Arbe Babot, or Bavos, for Shabbat. He plays it for them for Erev Shabbat. The soldiers in Rafah. It's unbelievable. I will also play you a more complete rendition performed by a beautiful cello player, a young woman. Remember, this is a nigun, which is sung without words. The name of the nigun is Arbe Bavot. In Aramaic, it means 4 gates. Bab in Aramaic means gate. The song is about the 4 parts of Kabbalah, of mysticism. It's a nigun and sung during the high holidays and at weddings. This nigun is so powerful, especially because it's wordless. It is remarkable. Let's listen.
העלינו לקדושה.
They are both very deep and very powerful renditions. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.